I'm just gonna say it, Genku is busted. Or at least way better than people are giving it credit for. And look, I'm a self-admitted Azorius guy. I've done videos on Afara and Abuelo. I rated Aisha second on my underrated commanders list. I get it, I'm biased. But there is something about Genku that very few people are talking about. Genku Future Shaper is a 4-mana value 2/5 Moonfolk wizard. Whenever another non-token permanent you control leaves the battlefield, choose one that hasn't been chosen this turn, and that's create a creature token of either a 1/1 lifelinking black rat, a 2/2 vigilant white fox, or a 2/1 flying blue moonfolk. Then as an activated ability, pay Azorius and 3 generic mana to put a +1/+1 counter on each creature you control. When you look at Genku, you probably think, oh, another Blink commander. Actually, you probably thought it was Goku and this is a Universes Beyond card for One Piece or something. Well, it's neither. Yes, you can use Blink with Genku and it's fine, but there is a subtle difference between Genku and most Blink commanders that you should be taking advantage of. Let's look at Brago King Eternal's Blink ability. Whenever Brago King Eternal deals blah 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 blah, okay, here's the important part. Then return those cards to your battlefield. Note that Genku does not give a crap about things coming back to the battlefield. So how do we make the best use of this little twist? We already mentioned Blink and that's fine, sure. But let's talk about some different ways to get non-token permanents to leave the battlefield. Now this is only going to work when bouncing your own stuff, not bounce in general, but wizards have been slowly sowing the seeds for a bounce archetype. One of the biggest payoffs that come to mind is Baron Talarian Archmage, which will do a bounce, but also give you a card draw if you return something to your hand. Combine this with classic Azorius creature bounce like White Man Lion or Deputy of Acquittals, and you have a good little foundation for a bounce package, if not a whole deck. This is probably about the closest to an Aristocrats commander Azorius is going to have, but I don't think an entire Aristocrats deck would work just yet. But you still have a real good amount of options to make a sacrifice package work. Zoran Orb will always be there for any deck. And since Genku can trigger multiple times over each turn, you do want some zero cost effects, so you get up to the 3 tokens per turn. You probably want to use Second Sunrise type effects to go with any sacrifice strategy, especially if you plan on sacrificing all your lands. You are going to need lands later on in the game. The last way to approach Genku is by simply not giving a frick. I mean, think about it, Azorius has a lot of good, let's say utility creatures, where if you added when this dies make a 2/2 fox. Well, that utility creature would be really good. Not only can you just make all your creatures better, but you can actually break the symmetry of creature decks. How? By wipes. With Genku, a Wrath of God will leave you ahead of the table while everyone else starts over at 0. The deck I'm going to present is kind of a hybrid between a token strategy and an Azorius utility creature strategy, with a bit of control that I think is really good with Genku. A link to the full deck list will be in the description below, and I'll be presenting alternate cards during each section, and an entire alternate section in case you want to try something a bit funky that I haven't really tested out, but it was percolating in my brain. I'm going to start with wipes because that's one of the surprise strengths of this deck. Let's get out of the way the most normal wipe, and it's Austere Command. I prefer this over Farewell purely for the option to wipe specific classes of creatures instead of just all or nothing. The next 4 are all specifically chosen to allow Genku to withstand the wipe, because you want it to stay in play while everything else leaves the battlefield. That way you don't need to recast it to start dumping counters on your remaining tokens. Divine Reckoning will let you keep your Genku around, but be careful, your opponents will get the same. Luckily, the tokens you create should still be enough to have an advantage on the battlefield. Slaughter the Strong is real good, since you can just pick Genku and another creature, and a lot of times you can catch your opponents in a situation where they have to sacrifice all their creatures. The sacrifice part is also relevant, as it'll get around a lot of traits that would let a creature survive a wipe. Promise of Loyalty will let each player keep a creature, with the upside that the creatures the other players keep can't attack you anymore, as they're now your serfs or something. This might be the best case scenario for single combat, where you get to keep your Genku, get a bunch of tokens, but no one else can get creatures back on the board until after a full round has gone by. There are lots of wipes available in Azorius that you could run, but I think these would be my next choices. Hour of Reckoning will destroy all the non-token creatures, and it has Convoke, which is another tangent you could consider for this deck since you'll have a good amount of tokens to reduce the mana cost of stuff. The Battle of Bywater is probably best here since Genku and your tokens will live through it generally, if you don't have too many Anthem effects going. You could reduce the number of Anthem effects, but you really wouldn't want to as that's kind of the strength of your deck. Divine Visitation will turn all your Genku tokens into angels, which I refer to as Divine Gentrification, where all those damn angels reduce the token diversity and the weird cloud house thing that Genku lives in. Anointed Possession, Mondrak Glory Dominus, and Ojurtok Deepest Foundation will make more tokens when you make tokens. And don't ask me how many tokens get made if you have 2 of these out, bro. I don't have a math degree. I'm just a humble mom and pop YouTuber with not even 2,000 subscribers. To help change that, maybe consider subscribing to the channel. My last token card is a personal favorite. It's Promise of Bunrai, or Bunrai, whatever. It's not like super great, but when a creature dies, Promise of Bunrai will die, so you get another Genku token and 4 other tokens. This is just a personal choice. This card did a lot of work for me during Kamigawa block, and it deserves its moment in the sun. I think one other card could fit here, and it's Mystic Reflection. Now this won't work on a massive scale with multiple Genku triggers, since Mystic Reflection says the next time, and Genku triggers each time something leaves the battlefield, not all at once. However, I think that because you will be able to make tokens pretty much at will, and at any time, you can get a lot of value from Mystic Reflection either offensively or defensively. Since we're okay with our dudes just dying, I run a package that will bring them back, just in case something we really like ends up dead. We start with a few Fallout cards in Battle of Hoover Dam and Arcade Ganon. In general, you want to pick NCR with the Battle of Hoover Dam, regardless of how much NCR sucks in the game. Arcade won't be able to get everything in the deck back, but we do run 14 humans total in the deck, and we will want to recur a lot of them. Additionally, the sculpting it provides is not to be overlooked. Ameria Shepherd and Celestine the Living Saint will both bring back pretty much whatever you want from the graveyard, creature-wise anyways. Celestine will be good for 3 mana value with her lifelink and power of 3, but remember the rat tokens from Genku also have lifelink, so Celestine might even be able to bring back some bigger stuff when attacking with some of those rats. Okay, so I have one card whose job it is to specifically die and be brought back, and that is Kami of False Hope, which can create a lot of soft locks of fogs. Say that 3 times fast. It's not great, but it is funny to just randomly raw dog it and drop it on an unsuspecting table. I finish off the bring back section with Scare Tiller and Crucible of Worlds, neither of which will bring back a creature, but instead they're used to recur another avenue that we'll be using to get Genku tokens. Sun Titan is a white classic bring back effect, and it will work pretty well here too. Amiri the Sky Ruin is very powerful, but to hit the plains requirement, you would want to rework the mana base and maybe shift a couple of the blue cards out of the deck. I run a small triplet of bounce cards. This bounce is, let's say not the greatest mana for return on investment out there. Maloku will provide consistent land bounce at a relatively small cost, and will provide you another token in addition to the Genku token. Whitemane Lion and Stonecloaker are just great bounce to save another creature, but they can also just bounce themselves if you're in dire need of some Genku triggers. After all, a Whitemane Lion, cast 3 times, returning itself 3 times, will get you all 3 Genku tokens. Niambi Esteemed Speaker will bounce a creature, get you a bit of life, but can also get you more cards. We run 11 legends, so it's not always going to happen, but there is a lot of upside if you ever do use it compared to the standard Whitemane Lion. Essence Reliquary will let you bounce anything on your turn, so you could use it in response to removals or as a combat trick type thing. It's not spectacular, but it's really solid to have an effect like this be free and innocuous enough to withstand removal. Since we're relying on creatures, and generally smaller creatures at that, we want them to get big and swole, but in a natural way, like the Rock. We'll start with Call for Unity and Lulu Loyal Holophant, both of whom will buff your creatures with either counters or an Anthem effect. Oh, and they only count when permanents leave the battlefield. I wonder who would do such a thing. Philidar Retreat and Virtue of Loyalty will put counters on all of your creatures. They will also make a token or tokens respectively, but you generally have enough of those and just want the buffs that these will provide. Inspiring Leader and Ultramarine Honor Guard will both provide beefy anthems for your tokens. It goes without saying that Ultramarine Honor Guard is from the Warhammer set because it has a random U in the word honor. Truly a grim dark fantasy setting. Okay, this card isn't an anthem or buff in itself, but Training Grounds will reduce the cost of Genku's built-in counter placer to a measly 3 mana, which makes it a great value. Salvation Colossus is something that I really wanted to run but couldn't justify it. +2/+2 and indestructible each attack is great, but you won't ever be able to unearth it, and 8 mana is a lot of mana for the initial effect. Elesh Norn Grand Cenobite is a commander mainstay, and you could totally run it here if you want. Eldrazi Monument was my last cut from the deck in the Anthem section. I really liked it, but I just didn't want to risk not being able to sacrifice a creature for it and lose 5 mana investment for nothing. Though I do think I'm probably overreacting here and it's worth the risk, and I think I'm just worrying too much about the worst case scenario. The interaction will be mostly made up of creatures, the exceptions being Abjure and or a Fracture. A counterspell and an enchantment messer-upper that will remove your permanents from the battlefield. Remember how Crucible of Worlds and Scaretiller showed up completely randomly earlier? Aura Fracture is one of those cards with land sacrifice synergy. For Abjure, it's just a blue permanent that needs to be sacrificed, so feel free to yeet one of your Moonfolk tokens from Genku for this 1 mana counterspell. Getting onto the creatures, let me start with Portal Mage and Portal Manipulator. These will let you mess people's combats up, and that's it. A side note about me, I used to play another card game called Legend of the Five Rings, which had a multiplayer component that was way more developed as a multiplayer game than Commander is. In that mode, you could attack another player, and then both the attacker and defender could actually ask for allies, and other players could send their creatures to either join the attack or help with the defense for a small bonus. My favorite card in that game was False Alliance, which just let you switch sides of the battle. So I would either betray people, or if the battle was not going my side's way, just change teams. Ever since then, I've had an unnatural allegiance to cards that mess with players' combat steps. Also, the Portal games are really good, so all hail my Portal queens. The cake is a lie, and etc. and whatnot. Lorn of the Third Path, Cathar Commander, and Dauntless Dismantler will all mess up artifacts and enchantments, with Cathar Commando and Dauntless Dismantler having the extra benefit of them leaving the battlefield for Genku tokens. Bounty Agent and Commander Sophia de Guerre will both destroy legendary stuff, and you generally don't have to look too hard for a legendary permanent to kill in Commander. Solitude and Cavalier of Dawn are both elementals that will just blow up stuff. I just realized that the name of this channel is Element Hobbies, but I don't have an elemental deck. But I guess to be fair, I don't have a hobby deck either, so what can you do? Samwise the Stout-Hearted will save a thing, and Skyclave Apparition will exile a thing. They're relatively inexpensive, so they can be brought back with your bring back cards pretty easily. Junkwinder will turn all your Genku tokens into stuns, which is pretty damn good. Tishana's Tidebinder and Voidmage Husher will help nullify abilities, with Voidmage Husher triggering Genku anytime you cast a spell. The last interaction cards are 2 wizards, the first being Glenalendra Archmage, which will trigger Genku on activation and come back for more. The other is Voidmage Prodigy, which will let you sacrifice wizards to counter spells. We run 9 wizards in total, so you won't have an unending supply to sacrifice to the Voidmage Prodigy. But I think with bring back cards and just the Voidmage Prodigy sacrificing itself a couple times, that would be pretty good value. A good alternative you can run is Remorseful Cleric, obviously if you have a meta full of graveyard decks. Martyr's Bond is a good choice since you can purposefully sacrifice your stuff and make your opponents do the same. And since you don't really care about your stuff dying, you can play fast and loose with your stuff, making your opponent suffer along the way. Martyr's Cause could be interesting. It lets you get your creatures into the bin easily, making a token and preventing damage. It should be noted that this damage prevention can be from any source, so if you end up with a Genku Pillow Fort style version, this could be a good politicking card. If you're a huge jerk, you can run Mana Vortex. Everyone will start sacrificing lands, and when you do, you'll get a token. No one at the table will like this, which makes it basically the opposite of this video, which everyone's going to click the like button on. For sculpting, I kind of just go with the flow, there isn't much spice here. The deck is a little bit underpowered, so to compete you sometimes just need to outcard people. Welcoming Vampire, Takesia's Welcome, and Benny Brack Zoologist are all really good card draw and token strategies. These will all trigger on your turn, but each other turn as well, which is really good considering Genku can make tokens literally all the time. Esper Sentinel, Azami Lady of Scrolls, and Archivist of Ligma are all good card draw, with Azami having a real big upside. Now you do only run 9 wizards in the deck, we mentioned that before, but considering Genku itself is a wizard and doesn't need to be tapped for any of its abilities, you can often play Azami and be getting at least 2 card draws around from it. I finished the sculpting with Enlightened Tutor, Land Tax, and Weathered Wayfarer. Enlightened Tutor is just good, and Withered Wayfarer and Land Tax will synergize well with our super secret land sacrificing strategy. Wonderscape Sage barely missed the cut, considering that it does get you a loot, but also will return a land to your hand, ultimately helping out our bounce plan. But you only do have 100 card slots in your deck, so sometimes things just need to get cut. If you do want to run this over something else, note that the non-basic type doesn't mean just any non-basic land. A non-basic land type is something like a cave or a gate. Rumor Gatherer is really good also, but just barely missed the cut. The requirement of having a second creature come into play to get an actual card draw was a bit too much, and it will happen a lot, but considering that blue has fantastic sculpting and white now has fantastic sculpting, Rumor Gatherer just doesn't maybe cut it in Azorius. I would probably say it's very good in Selesnya or Boros. Afara, God of the Polis is a personal favorite and is easier to trigger than Rumor Gatherer, but the card draw is delayed by a turn. I would in general rather have something immediately, but you can feel free to run this if you like. I run 6 pretty standard ramp in Exoria's Signet, Everflowing Chalice, Felwar Stone, Mind Stone, Talisman of Progress, and Thought Vessel. I follow up with Deep Gnome Terramancer, and Knight of the White Orchid and Claim Jumper, who will both work with our land sacrifice strategy. The Golden Throne almost made the cut since I've been looking for a place for this for a while, as I think the lore of it is pretty cool. Sacrificing a creature to get another token for multiple uses of the throne seems pretty good, and if you would die, just exile the throne. That's another token. Keeper of the Accord will make tokens and get you lands because of our aforementioned super secret land strategy, which I will fully unleash now. Essentially, we're going to be sacrificing our lands. Let's start with 2 of my boomer favorites, Keljoran Outpost and Soldevi Excavations. These will keep your mana at the same level, but also get you a Genku trigger. It'll also put lands into your graveyard for things like Crucible of Worlds and keep your land count low for stuff like land tax. Strip Mine, Wasteland, and Dust Bowl will keep problematic lands in check, but also do a lot of what we just talked about, getting stuff into the graveyard, creating tokens, etc, etc, etc. Fine Glaciers and Urza's Cave will let you get lands out of your deck and into play, all the while providing tokens from Genku. Though not in line with our land sacrifice strategy, Riptide Laboratory will save Genku on occasion or some of your other wizards, which will in turn make tokens for Genku. Mystic Sanctuary is good but doesn't really help your strategy in any way at all. If you just want the goodness and the extra value, go for it. Scavenger Grounds will remove itself from play, so that's good for us. However, exiling all graveyards is really risky because we do have some stuff in our graveyards that we want to bring back with our bring back cards or Crucible of Worlds. Field of the Dead can get you a lot of tokens, mostly because of the particular mana lands that we run, which are 7 fetch lands that will get either an island or plains, and a Prismatic Vista, which is a lot of sacrificing for Genku tokens and fuel for either a Crucible of Worlds or Scare Tiller. I go a bit light on the dual lands, running just the 6 Azorius dual lands. Try to make as many of them have either the plains or island type, so the fetches can grab them. I finish off the mana with 8 plains and 6 islands, which is a bit more than I would normally run, but I want basic land types for the fetch lands, and I need some of them for like the Keljoran Outpost. Now here's where things get experimental. I don't have specific numbers for any of this, but it was just something that I had been thinking about. Genku could benefit from a mana strategy involving a lot of bounce lands. Azorius Chancery, yeah, obviously, but you also can dig deeper into Karoo type stuff. There are also a good amount of lands that bounce other lands, or themselves. And they aren't all great, but you could run them in conjunction with something like Amulet of Vigor, Walking Atlas, and Patron of the Moon, among other things. And again, this is all experimental. I've only messed around with it in theory, and it is fun, but I don't know how good it is. If you want to try it, more power to you. I think it's pretty fun, and I will probably try it eventually. Upfront, Genku isn't very powerful, and is kind of the grindy decision-making deck that I love. It does a little bit of everything, and has enough of the overwhelming token stuff that can seal off a game once you get a bit of an advantage. If you're just looking for a concentrated token deck, there are probably more powerful commanders you could choose, but making a token replacing every permanent that leaves the battlefield is really underrated. I think over time, this commander will get a bit more attention. If you're interested in the Afara or Abuelo decks I mentioned earlier, you can click either of these to see how I run Azorius Control or a Blink deck. Thank you for watching Element Hobbies. Consider subscribing to this channel if you enjoyed the video, and I will see you around.